Hi, I'm Joe, and I'm here to talk about some exciting IoT news that we've been watching in Dabra here over the last month. So, first of all, I want to apologise for the production quality here. I am recording this on my iPhone this month. Our marketing crew are doing the right thing and they're staying home. And as you can see, the office behind me is deserted. I live a short walk from the office, so I came down here, but everybody is working remotely. So a lot has changed since our last video in February. But a lot of interesting news still out there. A lot of things happening in IoT. I'm particularly going to focus on Microsoft because they've done quite a few interesting things this month. First of all, Microsoft have announced a partnership with Cisco. Cisco Edge devices are now going to be natively supported on the IoT Azure Hub. Cisco Edge devices are these ruggedized networking devices. They have all the networking features and the security features that Cisco are famous for, but they also have an application container environment on board, so you can put apps inside those gateways that talk to legacy assets or industrial assets, like what you'd see in machines on a manufacturing line or wind turbines, things like that. So this makes total sense. So for Cisco, it eases the onboarding of their devices into IoT solutions, and for Azure, it's going to drive the adoption of Azure services, having another partnership with a vendor like Cisco. This was announced by the IoT GM in Azure, Tony Shakib, who incidentally was the SVP of IoT in Cisco a few years ago, so I'm sure he knows a lot about the benefits of what Cisco can bring to Azure. Another interesting piece of news from Microsoft this month is the acquisition of Affirmed Networks. The sum is undisclosed, but Affirmed Networks had raised $155 million since 2010. And this is really a 5G play. So 5G adoption is accelerating around the globe. By 2025, they're saying that about 20% of global connections are going to be 5G connections. So Firm Networks are a leader in virtualized 5G packet core and can run natively on a cloud. So with the virtualized packet core, they enable telcos to offer customized 5G services to their customers in days, not weeks, and at a very fine-grained level, around things like scale and bandwidth and security profiles. The cost savings for a telco looking to offer a 5G service on this virtualized packet core is around 60% of the capex and 90% of the opex. So it's a really really disruptive technology. It'll play a big part in IoT also. In 3G and 4G, a lot of those services were targeted towards consumers. In 5G, a lot of the services are going to be targeted towards enterprise. And in enterprise, I think there's more of a need to be able to customize your offering based on all the different verticals that you come across. So, for example, in a 5G service that's suitable for a connected car could be very different than a 5G service that's suitable for a smart meter. And Affirmed Networks have a capability to create what's called network slices, which enables you to create tailored services for individual verticals or even individual customers. So this makes a lot of sense for Azure, to have a leader in a virtualized 5G packet core is going to drive a serious amount of traffic through the Azure infrastructure and drive a lot of adoption of their services. Now, the interesting thing here is that they've really seemed to have pinched this from under the nose of Amazon, because Affirmed Networks are currently live. They do have a public cloud service, but it's not hosted on Azure. It's actually currently hosted on AWS. So obviously with the acquisition, they're going to be, Affirmed Networks are going to be hosted on Azure, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with all those customers. I mean, I assume they're going to have to do some sort of migration, sort of Azure are getting those customers as well. So it sends a big message from Azure that they are positioning themselves as the best cloud option for telcos to transform their services. Another piece of news is that Github, who Microsoft acquired in 2018 for $7.5 billion, have now themselves acquired NPM. And NPM is a package manager for JavaScript. NPM is the world's largest software registry. There's about 130 million software packages. They get about 75 billion downloads a month. It's a huge open source community around it, and Microsoft have moved very quickly actually to allay fears of that community by insisting they are going to keep it free. So NPM is the package manager for JavaScript, and JavaScript is probably the most popular runtime for microservices. And really, it's the rapid development of microservices that's fueling the growth of IoT, because the IoT applications are fueled by microservices. So by already owning the world's largest software repository in GitHub, and now owning the world's largest software registry in NPM, it really is interesting, because it looks like Microsoft are just buying the world's development community. Interesting stuff. Finally, with the times we're living with, I thought I should talk a bit about how technology can help tackle the current COVID-19 pandemic. First of all, I have to say that a vaccine is the most important thing. If anything that can help accelerate the timeline to get a vaccine, that should get most focus. But that said, a vaccine is 12 to 18 months out, and so we really just have to try and mitigate the fact that the virus is here and we have no vaccine. This pandemic has kind of brought a lens down on a lot of technology and the way we use it. And for example, remote working has rocketed the usage and share price of companies like Zoom. I'm going to focus more on how IoT can play a part. And I've seen a few different interesting approaches. There's just too many to mention, but a few interesting things I've seen. First of all, thermal imaging has been used effectively, and I think that's interesting because when you see it being deployed in places like South Korea and Asia, where they had a pandemic, or back in 2002 they had the SARS outbreak, and one of the things that got left over after that was these thermal imaging cameras that were deployed in these public locations. So all that was used very effectively to screen people coming through, to basically monitor them for a high temperature. And essentially these are stationary devices, and I've seen these get deployed as well in Western countries now. There's a rush to get them into public locations, and even in companies are deploying them where you have essential workers that have to work and find it very hard to do the social distancing. They are using thermal imaging as an early warning system. I have seen approaches to make this mobile, because as I said, those are stationary units, so drone technology to be able to ultimately effectively like a drone hovering around over a crowd trying to spot people with high temperature. Contact tracing is another interesting area where there's a lot of innovation taking place. It was used very effectively in China, where individuals' locations and timestamps corresponding to those locations, as well as identifiers for that individual, were being stored. And when they had a confirmed case, they could very quickly pull a report up to show every other individual who was in contact with that person while they were infectious, to really sped up the contact tracing. Smart streetlights could also play a part. A lot of the smart streetlights that are out there now can detect crowds. They can see a crowd gathering, and they could be used as they could relay that information to security forces where they detect non-compliance with social distancing guidelines. It also could play an interesting feedback loop into authorities and countries' leadership, where they can get a feedback loop to show them how effective their messaging is based on the compliance that's being detected, remotely monitored using these sensors of crowds gathering or not gathering. These are just a few examples. There's of some interesting avenues. I think all of them raise a lot of privacy questions, and a lot of these, the way this data was collected, it flies in the face of GDPR guidelines, and I think it does raise a lot of questions about the trade-offs between privacy versus sacrificing that privacy to save lives, and there is a lot of emergency legislation being drawn up around the world right now on this. But one thing that's interesting is the European Commission themselves, who initially set about the data protection reform, which led to GDPR. So the European Commission have themselves been urging telecoms giants like Deutsche Telekom and Orange to share people's mobile data. So I guess desperate times. Another thing that's going to drive a lot of innovation is a lot of the funding mechanisms are out there. So like the EU have released an accelerator fund of €164 million targeted at startups or SMEs that to accelerate their innovations that they can bring to the market to either test or monitor or treat or anything related to dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic. So that's going to accelerate a lot more. We're going to see a lot more innovations coming out very fast, because that's all being accelerated. Here in Ireland, we also have funds. We've got the Health Research Board and Science Foundation Ireland have both announced funding mechanisms to accelerate the development of anything that can help solve this crisis. In Davra, we have a long history of monitoring healthcare in various settings, whether it be monitoring patients in hospitals or in their home or even in ambulances. And we are working diligently with our partners to develop technology using IoT and using our platform to monitor healthcare workers and essential workers who cannot social distance, and to put mitigation in place for those getting infected. And what we're seeing is amazing, the alignment between industries, where things that previously took quarters in terms of timeline are now taking days. And I think what we're going to be left with, once we get over this surge, because we have to deal with the surge now and get on top of it, but once we get over the surge, what I see we're going to be left with is a set of technologies and processes that really forms the basis of an effective pandemic response system, which will be in place for us for the next wave of this, or the next strain, whatever that is. The world is going to definitely learn from this and put in place a system that deals with it much better. So look at that's all the news I have for this month. So until next month, take care, stay safe, and stay home.